The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the weather-beaten sign that read, St. Joe, Missouri ESD. 1843, kicking up a cloud of dust that momentarily obscured Clara Jones's first view of what was to be her new home. The year was 1871, and after a grueling 3-week journey from Philadelphia, Clara's body ached nearly as much as her heart did from leaving everything she had ever known behind. "End of the line for you, miss," the driver called down, his voice gruff but not unkind. "St. Joe. Hope your intended is waitin'." Clara smoothed her travel-worn blue dress and tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair back into her once neat bun. At 22, she had resigned herself to spinsterhood in Philadelphia until she'd seen the advertisement in the newspaper. Seeking God-fearing woman of good character and health to be bride to prosperous landowner in St. Joe, Missouri. The letters that followed from Mr. Harold Winters had been polite, businesslike, and offered something Clara desperately needed: escape from the crushing poverty that had followed her father's death. As the only child of a scholar who had left behind nothing but debts and books, Clara had few options. "Thank you, sir," she said, accepting the driver's weathered hand as he helped her down from the coach. Her trunk followed, landing with a thud in the dirt of what passed for the town's main street. St. Joe was smaller than she had imagined. A single dusty street lined with wooden buildings, some with false fronts trying to appear grander than they were. A saloon, general store, small church, and what looked like a bank made up the heart of the town. People moved about their business, occasionally glancing her way with undisguised curiosity. A portly man in a fine but slightly outdated suit approached her, twisting a pocket watch chain nervously around his finger. "Miss Jones?" he asked, his voice higher than she had expected. "Yes, Mr. Winters." Clara extended her hand, trying to summon a smile despite the knot of apprehension in her stomach. The man's round face flushed. No, I'm Elmer Pickens, Mr. Winters' associate. He sent me to collect you." He didn't take her offered hand, instead looking uncomfortably at her trunk. "Is this all you've brought?" Clara withdrew her hand, embarrassment washing over her. "Yes, this is everything." "Very well." He signaled to a boy lounging nearby. "Take Miss Jones's trunk to Mr. Winters' property." Turning back to Clara, he said, "If you'll follow me, miss, Mr. Winters is indisposed at present, but has arranged accommodations for you until the wedding." Something in his manner made Clara uneasy, but what choice did she have? She had spent nearly every penny she had on the journey west. She followed Mr. Pickens down the street, aware of the stares from the townspeople. They walked past the buildings of the main street and toward a large, imposing house set back from the others. It was by far the grandest structure in St. Joe, 2 stories of painted wood with a wraparound porch and glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport to this remote place. "Mr. Winters' home," Pickens announced with a note of pride. "Finest house in the county." Clara felt a small surge of relief. Perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be so bad after all. The house spoke of wealth and stability, everything she had hoped for when she'd agreed to this arrangement. But instead of mounting the steps to the front door, Pickens led her around to the back of the house. "Shouldn't we?" Clara began, but Pickens cut her off. "Mr. Winters has specific instructions," he said, not meeting her eyes. "You are to remain sequestered until the wedding. For propriety's sake, of course." Before Clara could protest, they had reached a heavy wooden door set into the ground, like the entrance to a root cellar. Pickens produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the padlock securing it. "I don't understand," Clara said, backing away slightly. "Surely there's an appropriate room in the house, Mr. Winters insists," Pickens said, his voice firmer now. "It's only for a few days until the arrangements are complete. There's a cot, some food and water, Quite comfortable, really. Clara's heart began to pound. This isn't what was agreed. She never finished her sentence because Pickens, with surprising strength for his size, shoved her hard. Clara stumbled backward, losing her balance and tumbling down a short set of stairs into darkness. The door slammed shut above her and she heard the decisive click of the padlock. "Mr. Pickens," she cried, scrambling to her feet and rushing up the stairs to pound on the door. "This is madness. Let me out at once." "3 days, Miss Jones," came his muffled reply. "Mr. Winters will come for you when he's ready. He likes his brides to be grateful." His footsteps retreated, leaving Clara alone in the dim cellar with nothing but the sound of her own panicked breathing. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she could make out her surroundings. The cellar was about 12 feet square, with earthen walls and a packed dirt floor. A small oil lamp sat unlit on a rough wooden table, alongside a pitcher of water and a loaf of bread. A narrow cot with a thin blanket was pushed against one wall, and a bucket in the corner clearly served as the only sanitary facility. Clara sank onto the cot, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. What kind of man locked his bride to be in a cellar? What other horrors awaited her if this was how he treated her before they were even wed? She wouldn't wait to find out. Clara rose and systematically explored the cellar, looking for any weakness, any way out. The walls were solid earth and stone. The ceiling was low, wooden beams supporting the floor of the house above. The only exit was the door at the top of the stairs, and it was solidly built and securely locked. Hours passed. Clara lit the lamp with the matches provided and rationed her water, unsure when or if it would be replenished. Night must have fallen above, for the thin cracks around the door no longer showed any light. She lay on the cot, too frightened to sleep, straining to hear any sound from the world outside her prison. Occasionally, she heard footsteps overhead or voices in the distance, but no one came near the cellar door. By the second day, Clara had developed a routine. She would wake from her fitful sleep, use the bucket, wash her face with a small amount of water, and then spend hours trying to find a way out. She had discovered that one of the stones in the wall was loose, but digging it out only revealed more earth behind it. In the afternoon, she guessed at the time from the thin sliver of light that penetrated through the door cracks, she heard heavy footsteps approach the cellar. The padlock rattled, and Clara quickly positioned herself behind the door, ready to rush past whoever opened it. The door swung open, letting in a blinding shaft of sunlight. A silhouette appeared. "Elmer Pickens. Food and water for you, Miss Jones," he said, setting down a tray just inside the door. "Mr. Winters sends his regards and says the wedding will be tomorrow at sundown." Clara lunged forward, but Pickens was ready for her. He slammed the door shut before she could reach it, the lock clicking into place once more. "You can't do this," she shouted through the door. "This is kidnapping. I'll go to the sheriff, Sheriff Carter." Pickens' laugh was unpleasant. "He's attending your wedding tomorrow. Nobody crosses Harold Winters in St. Joe, Miss Jones. Best make your peace with that." Clara slumped against the door, despair washing over her. The town's law enforcement was clearly in Winters' pocket. She was truly trapped. That night, as Clara lay on the cot staring into the darkness, she heard a new sound: horses approaching the house, followed by angry voices. She sat up, straining to hear. "Winters?" A deep, commanding voice called out. "Winters, get out here." There was the sound of the house's front door opening, and Harold Winters' voice. She assumed it was his, though she'd never heard it answered. "What's the meaning of this, Dawson? It's nearly midnight." "Where is she?" the man called Dawson demanded. "The stage-coach driver said he brought a mail-order bride to town 2 days ago, headed for your place. Nobody's seen her since." "My personal affairs are none of your concern," Winters replied coldly. Get off my property." "Not until I see she's all right," Dawson insisted. "People are talking, Winters, saying she disappeared same as the last one." "The last one?" Clara's blood ran cold. "There had been others, Sheriff," Winters called. "Remove this man from my property." "Now, Dawson," a new voice said, presumably the sheriff's, "you know better than to cause trouble. Miss Jones is resting after her journey. She'll be at the wedding tomorrow, and you can see for yourself she's fine." "And if she isn't?" Dawson challenged. "Then I'll handle it according to the law," the sheriff said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Now move along before I have to lock you up for disturbing the peace." Clara heard the sounds of reluctant retreat, hoofbeats fading into the distance. She rushed to the door, pounding on it with all her might. "Help! I'm down here! Help me!" She shouted, but her voice couldn't penetrate the heavy wood and earth surrounding her prison. The third day dawned with Clara having barely slept. Today was the wedding day, the day she would be forced to marry a man who had imprisoned her, a man who apparently had done this before. What had happened to the last one Dawson had mentioned? She paced the small space, her mind frantically searching for a way out. The only time the door opened was when food was delivered. She would have to be ready. Around midday, footsteps approached again. Clara positioned herself, a heavy ceramic water pitcher gripped tightly in her hands. When the door opened, she would strike Pickens and run. The lock rattled, and the door began to swing inward. Clara raised the pitcher, ready to bring it down, but it wasn't Pickens who appeared in the doorway. A tall, broad-shouldered man she had never seen before stood there, his expression changing from determination to surprise as he saw her poised to attack. "Whoa there," he said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to hurt you. Are you Clara Jones?" Clara lowered the pitcher slightly but didn't relinquish her grip. "Who are you?" "Dawson Zimmerman," he replied. "I heard about a bride arriving for Winters, and no one's seen you since. Figured something wasn't right." His blue eyes took in her disheveled appearance and the cellar beyond. "Looks like I was right. How did you get in?" Clara asked, still wary. "Winters and Pickens rode into town to arrange the wedding. I've been watching the house." He extended his hand. "Now, would you like to get out of here before they come back?" Clara hesitated only a moment before setting down the pitcher and taking his hand. Dawson helped her up the stairs and into the blinding sunlight of the late afternoon. She squinted against the brightness, taking her first good look at her rescuer. Dawson Zimmerman was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it met the collar of his worn leather vest. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His nose had clearly been broken at least once, and a thin scar ran along his jaw, but his blue eyes were kind and direct. "We need to move quickly," he said, guiding her toward a chestnut horse tethered nearby. "Winters has most of the town in his pocket, but not everyone." "Where are we going?" Clara asked, her legs unsteady after days in the cellar. "My ranch for now. It's a few miles outside town. You'll be safe there until we figure out what to do next." He helped her onto the horse before swinging up behind her. "Hold on tight." Clara gripped the saddle horn as Dawson urged the horse into a gallop, away from Winter's house and the nightmare it contained. The wind in her face and the warmth of the sun on her skin felt like the sweetest freedom after her imprisonment. They rode hard for about 20 minutes before cresting a hill that revealed a modest but well-maintained ranch nestled in a small valley. A one-story log house stood near a barn and corral where several horses grazed. Fields of what looked like wheat stretched behind the buildings, golden in the late afternoon sun. "It's not much," Dawson said as they approached, "but it's mine, paid for free and clear last year." "It's beautiful," Clara said sincerely. After the cellar, this open space with its big sky felt like paradise. Dawson helped her down from the horse when they reached the yard. A middle-aged woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on an apron. "Did you find her?" The woman called, then spotted Clara. "Thank the Lord. Come in, dear, you look half-starved." "This is Martha," Dawson explained as they walked toward the house. "She keeps house for me and makes sure I don't live like a complete savage." Martha ushered Clara inside, clicking her tongue disapprovingly at Clara's condition. "Sit yourself down. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread. You eat while Mr. Zimmerman explains what's going on in this town." The interior of the house was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful quilts that softened the rustic log walls. Clara sat at the kitchen table, accepting gratefully the bowl of fragrant stew Martha placed before her. Dawson sat across from her, his expression grave. "Miss Jones, I need to tell you about Harold Winters." Between bites of the first real food she'd had in days, Clara listened as Dawson laid out the ugly truth. "Winters owns half the businesses in St. Joe, including the bank. He foreclosed on my parents' ranch years ago, though I managed to buy back part of the land later. He's got the sheriff and judge in his pocket, and most folks are too scared to cross him." "But what about the other brides?" Clara asked. "The last one you mentioned at his house." Dawson's face darkened. "You're the third mail-order bride to come to St. Joe for Winters in the past 2 years. The first, Margaret Williams, supposedly died of fever a month after the wedding. The second, Elizabeth Turner, allegedly ran off after a week of marriage. Nobody saw either of them leave." "You think he killed them?" Clara said softly, the stew turning to ash in her mouth. "I can't prove anything," Dawson replied. "But yes, that's what I think, when I heard another bride was coming and then you disappeared." He shook his head. "I couldn't let it happen again." "What will he do when he finds me gone?" "Come looking, most likely, with the sheriff." Dawson leaned forward. "Miss Jones, I can try to get you on the next stage coach out of St. Joe tomorrow, but I won't lie to you. Winters has connections all along the route. He might find you." Clara set down her spoon, her appetite gone. "I have nowhere to go. I spent everything I had to get here." Martha, who had been quietly working at the stove, turned around. "You could stay here, dear. We could say you're my niece, come to help with the house." "It's too risky." Dawson shook his head. "Winters knows everyone in the county. He'd figure it out and then we'd all be in danger." Clara looked between them, touched by their willingness to help a stranger. "I won't put you in danger. Perhaps if I could just rest tonight, tomorrow I could try to reach the next town on foot." "Nonsense," Martha interrupted. "Mr. Zimmerman, what about Judge Patterson in Liberty? Didn't he help when Winters tried to take the McCready farm?" Dawson's expression brightened slightly. "That's not a bad idea. Patterson's the circuit judge. He'll be in Liberty for the next week or so, and he's one of the few men not afraid of Winters." "How far is Liberty?" Clara asked. "About 30 miles. We could be there by tomorrow afternoon if we leave at first light." Dawson studied her face. "But Miss Jones, I need to be clear. Once we go to the law, there's no turning back. Winters won't forget, and he won't forgive." Clara straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Zimmerman, that man locked me in a cellar for 3 days and likely murdered 2 women before me. I have no intention of letting him go unpunished." A ghost of a smile crossed Dawson's face. "Well then, we'd better get you settled for the night. You'll need your strength for tomorrow." Martha showed Clara to a small but clean bedroom and provided her with a nightgown and fresh clothes for the morning. "These were my daughters," she explained. "She's married now and living in Kansas City." Left alone, Clara sank onto the bed, the events of the past few days crashing over her. She was safe, at least for now, thanks to the kindness of strangers. But tomorrow would bring new dangers, and Winters would not give up easily. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. In her dreams, she was back in the cellar, pounding on a door that would never open. She woke before dawn to the smell of coffee and bacon. Dressing quickly in the borrowed clothes, a simple brown skirt and white blouse that fit reasonably well, she made her way to the kitchen. Dawson was already there, discussing plans with Martha. He wore a clean shirt and had trimmed his beard, she noticed. "Good morning, Miss Jones," he said, rising when she entered. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in days," she replied with a small smile. "And please call me Clara." "Clara," he repeated, as if testing the name. "Then you must call me Dawson." They ate quickly, Martha packing food for their journey as they did. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten when Dawson saddled 2 horses. "Can you ride?" he asked, bringing forward a gentle-looking mare. "It's been years," Clara admitted, "but I learned as a girl." "This is Penny," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She's steady and forgiving. Just follow my lead and we'll take it slow until you get comfortable." Clara mounted with Dawson's help, adjusting her borrowed skirt as best she could. It was far from ideal riding attire, but it would have to do. They had just led the horses out of the yard when the sound of approaching riders made Dawson tense. "Get back to the house," he said urgently. "Quick!" But it was too late. 4 riders appeared on the road, silhouetted against the dawn sky. Even from a distance, Clara recognized Elmer Pickens' portly figure. Beside him rode a tall, lean man she assumed was Harold Winters. The sheriff and another man she didn't recognize completed the group. "Well, well," Winters called as they approached. "If it isn't the thief Zimmerman and my wayward bride." Winters was older than Clara had expected, perhaps 50, with silver at his temples and cold, calculating eyes. He was expensively dressed in a black suit that looked out of place on horseback. "She's not your bride, Winters," Dawson replied, moving his horse slightly in front of Clara's. "And keeping a woman locked in a cellar isn't exactly standard courtship." "A misunderstanding," Winters said smoothly. "I merely wanted to ensure Miss Jones's comfort and privacy until our wedding." Pickens may have been overzealous in his arrangements. "Liar," Clara said, her voice shaking with anger. "You intended to keep me prisoner, just like the others." A flash of something dangerous crossed Winters' face before his mask of civility returned. "I don't know what tall tales Zimmerman has been filling your head with, Miss Jones, but I assure you, my previous wives met with unfortunate but natural ends." "That's enough," the sheriff interjected. "Miss Jones, Mr. Winters has reported you missing. I need you to come back to town with us." "She's not going anywhere with you," Dawson said, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. The sheriff's hand also moved to his weapon. "Don't make this worse, Dawson. I've got a legal duty to return her." "Actually," Martha said, stepping out onto the porch with a shotgun in her hands, "you don't. The young lady came here of her own free will after being held against her will. I'd say that makes her Mr. Winters' victim, not his property." The standoff stretched for a long moment, tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Finally, Winters laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Very well, we'll do this properly." He turned to the sheriff. "I want Zimmerman arrested for trespassing and breaking into my home." "You can't prove I did any such thing," Dawson replied. "Can I?" Winters nodded to the 4th rider, who produced a piece of fabric. "This was found caught on a broken window latch at my home. Matches that shirt you're wearing, doesn't it, Zimmerman?" Clara glanced at Dawson's sleeve and noticed a small tear she hadn't seen before. Her heart sank. "Sheriff," Winters continued, "I believe the law is clear. Arrest this man." The sheriff looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Dawson Zimmerman, I'm placing you under arrest for breaking and entering." He turned to Clara. "Miss Jones, you're free to do as you please, but I'd advise coming back to town. St. Joe's no place for a woman alone." "She won't be alone," Martha called from the porch. She'll be staying with me. Dawson looked at Clara, his expression pained. Go with Martha. I'll be all right. But Clara began. Trust me, he said quietly. This isn't over. As the sheriff approached to take Dawson into custody, Winters urged his horse closer to Clara. This changes nothing, Miss Jones, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You signed a contract and I paid for your passage. One way or another you will honor that agreement. Clara met his gaze steadily. I'd rather die. A cold smile spread across his face. That can be arranged, my dear. Just ask Margaret and Elizabeth. With that, he turned his horse and followed the sheriff, who was leading a now dismounted Dawson toward town. Clara watched helplessly as they took Dawson away, fear and guilt churning inside her. He was in this situation because of her. Come inside, dear, Martha said gently. We need to think. Back in the kitchen, Martha poured coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. Winters has gone too far this time, she said. Taking Dawson on false charges, he won't get away with it. What can we do? Clara asked. The sheriff works for Winters. Martha sat down heavily. Not everyone in town is under his thumb. Dawson has friends, good people who have stood against Winters before. She thought for a moment. Paul Jenkins runs the general store. His wife Sarah is my second cousin. They might help. And Judge Patterson in Liberty, Clara added. Dawson said he wasn't afraid of Winters. Martha nodded. Yes, but Liberty is too far to walk and they've taken both horses. Clara paced the kitchen, her mind racing. We need proof of what Winters has done, something that would convince even a corrupt sheriff. She stopped suddenly. The cellar. If the other women were held there too, there might be something, a possession, a carving on the wall, anything that would prove they were there. It's too dangerous, Martha protested. Winters will be watching his property now. Not if he's at the jail, dealing with Dawson, Clara pointed out. This might be our only chance. Martha studied her face and seemed to recognize the determination there. You're not going alone. We'll take my wagon. I need to go to town for supplies anyway. It'll give us an excuse to be there. They set off within the hour, Martha driving the wagon with Clara beside her. They had formed a plan. Martha would visit the general store to talk to Paul Jenkins while Clara tried to find a way back into the cellar. As they approached St. Joe, Clara's heart pounded so loudly she was sure Martha must hear it. The town looked different in daylight, smaller, somehow, but no less intimidating knowing what she now knew about its most powerful resident. Martha pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. Be careful, she warned Clara. If you see anyone at Winters' place, don't go near it. Come straight back here. Clara nodded, slipping away down a side street that would lead her toward Winters' house, without having to walk down the main street where she might be recognized. The grand house looked different in daylight, less imposing, more simply what it was, the home of a cruel man who used his power to hurt others. Clara approached cautiously from the back, staying close to the trees that lined the property. There seemed to be no one about. The house was silent, the curtains drawn. Clara made her way to the cellar door, which was, to her surprise, still unlocked from when Dawson had rescued her. Taking a deep breath, she pulled it open and descended into the darkness once more. Without the lamp, the cellar was nearly pitch black. Clara left the door slightly ajar to provide a thin beam of light. She moved methodically around the small space, examining every inch of the walls and floor. At first, she found nothing. Then, in the far corner behind the cot, her fingers felt something different in the earthen wall. Scratches. Pulling the cot aside, Clara knelt and peered at the wall. In the dim light, she could just make out letters carved into the packed earth. M.W. Help. And below that, another set. E.T. God Save Me, Margaret Williams, Elizabeth Turner. They had been here in this same hellish prison. They had scratched desperate pleas for help that no one had answered. Clara's throat tightened. She needed more than just initials. Frantically, she searched the rest of the cellar, running her hands along every surface, looking for anything the women might have left behind. Under a loose floorboard near the wall, her fingers touched something hard and cold. Pulling it out, she found a small locket on a broken chain. She prized it open in the dim light to reveal a tiny portrait of a young woman with a serious expression. On the opposite side, an inscription, "To Margaret, all my love, Father, 1868. This was proof. Solid, irrefutable proof that Margaret Williams had been here and had hidden her most precious possession, perhaps knowing she would not leave alive. Clara tucked the locket into her pocket and was about to continue searching when she heard voices above. Someone was in the house. She froze, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps moved across the floor above her, then stopped directly overhead. "Check the cellar," a voice commanded Elmer Pickens. "Make sure everything is cleaned up." Clara looked frantically around for a hiding place, but the cellar offered nowhere to conceal herself. The door at the top of the stairs began to open wider. In desperation, she flattened herself against the wall beside the stairs. If the person came all the way down and turned around, they would see her, but it was her only chance. Heavy boots descended the stairs, accompanied by the glow of a lantern. Clara held her breath, pressing herself as tightly against the wall as possible. The man, not Pickens, but someone she hadn't seen before, swung the lantern around, illuminating the cellar. He moved to the center of the room, examining the cot Clara had pushed aside. "Something's been moved down here," he called up. "The cot's out of place." "Check thoroughly," Pickens called back. "Winters wants everything ready for the next one." The next one. They were already planning to bring another woman here. Clara felt sick. The man continued his inspection, moving toward the wall where Clara had found the carved initials. Any moment now he would turn and see her. A loud crash from upstairs made him stop. "What was that?" he called. "Someone's outside," Pickens shouted. "Get up here." The man hurried back up the stairs without turning around. The cellar door slammed shut behind him, plunging Clara back into darkness. She heard shouting above, then the sound of running footsteps moving away from the house. Taking her chance, Clara stumbled up the stairs in the darkness and pushed against the door. It didn't budge. They had locked it again. Clara fought down panic, forcing herself to think clearly. There had to be another way out. She felt her way back down the stairs and began systematically exploring the walls, looking for any weakness. In the corner where she'd found the locket, the earth seemed softer. Clara dug with her fingers, tearing her nails and scraping her skin, but driven by the knowledge that this might be her only chance at freedom. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, her hand broke through into open space. She had found a forgotten root cellar or animal burrow that extended beyond the main cellar wall. Clara widened the hole until it was big enough to squeeze through. The tunnel beyond was tight and earthen, forcing her to crawl on her belly like a snake. It sloped upward, giving her hope that it might lead to the surface. Finally, her hand reached open air. She emerged, filthy and scraped, into a tangle of shrubs behind Winter's house. Staying low, she crawled through the undergrowth until she was clear of the property, then made her way back toward the general store, staying out of sight as much as possible. Martha was waiting anxiously by the wagon, her face lighting with relief when she spotted Clara approaching. "Thank God," she whispered. "I was about to come looking for you. What happened? You're covered in dirt." Clara quickly explained her discoveries and her narrow escape. "I have proof," she finished, showing Martha the locket. "This belonged to Margaret Williams. It was hidden under a floorboard." "This changes everything," Martha said. "Paul Jenkins is gathering some men who have stood against Winters before. They're meeting us at the livery stable. At the stable, they found Paul Jenkins, a tall, thin man with kind eyes, waiting with 3 other grim-faced men. "This is Bill Tucker. He runs the livery," Paul introduced. "And Tom Wilson and Frank Moore, both ranchers who have had trouble with Winters before." "They've got Dawson at the jail," Bill said without preamble. "Trial's set for tomorrow morning, fastest I've ever seen the court move." "Winters isn't taking chances," Tom added. "He wants Dawson convicted and sent to the territorial prison before anyone can intervene." Clara showed them the locket and told them what she'd found in the cellar. The men exchanged glances. "Margaret Williams," Frank said softly. "I remember when she came to town. Pretty little thing from back east. Winters said she died of fever, but no one ever saw the body." "We need to get to Judge Patterson in Liberty," Clara insisted. "He's our best hope for justice." "I'll take you," Bill offered. "I've got a fast horse and buggy." "We can be there by nightfall if we leave now." "What about Dawson?" Clara asked. "We can't leave him in that jail." Paul Jenkins squared his shoulders. "We'll make sure nothing happens to him until you get back with the judge. There are more of us who have had enough of Winters than he knows." Clara looked at the determined faces around her and felt hope for the first time since arriving in St. Joe. "Thank you," she said simply. "All of you." Within the hour, Clara was in Bill Tucker's buggy, racing toward Liberty. The road was rough, the journey jarring, but Clara barely noticed the discomfort, her mind fixed on the task ahead. They reached Liberty as dusk was falling, a town somewhat larger than St. Joe, with brick buildings and gas streetlights that spoke of greater prosperity. "Judge Patterson stays at the Liberty Hotel when he's in town for circuit court," Bill explained as they pulled up in front of a respectable-looking establishment. Inside, they were directed to a private dining room where Judge Patterson, a tall, distinguished man with a shock of white hair and piercing eyes, was finishing his dinner. "Your Honor," Bill said, removing his hat. "Sorry to interrupt your meal, but we've got an urgent situation in St. Joe that needs your attention." The judge eyed them curiously. "Mr. Tucker, isn't it? From the livery in St. Joe?" At Bill's nod, he continued, "And who is this young lady?" "Clara Jones, Your Honor," Clara said, stepping forward. "I've come about Harold Winters and the crimes he's committed." Judge Patterson's expression grew serious. "Sit down, both of you. Tell me everything." For the next hour, Clara laid out the entire story: her arrival as a mail-order bride, her imprisonment, Dawson's rescue, and her discovery of evidence that Winters had done the same to at least 2 other women who were now missing and presumed dead. She showed him the locket and described the initials carved in the cellar wall. When she finished, the judge was silent for a long moment. "This is a grave matter, Miss Jones," he finally said. "If what you say is true, Winters should hang for his crimes." "It's true, every word," Clara insisted. "And now he's falsely imprisoned Dawson Zimmerman, the man who saved me. The trial is set for tomorrow morning." Judge Patterson stood abruptly. "Then we have no time to waste. Mr. Tucker, is your buggy ready for an immediate return journey?" "Yes, sir," Bill replied. "Though the horses will need rest at some point. We'll change horses at the halfway point. I know a farm where we can get fresh ones." The judge turned to Clara. "Miss Jones, are you prepared to testify to everything you've told me under oath in a court of law?" "I am," Clara said firmly. "Then let's not delay further. Harold Winters has escaped justice for too long." The return journey was made in darkness, the buggy's lantern casting just enough light to see the road ahead. They stopped briefly at the farm Judge Patterson knew, where they were provided with fresh horses and coffee to keep them alert. They reached St. Joe as dawn was breaking, the town just beginning to stir. To Clara's surprise, a crowd had gathered outside the small courthouse. "Word spreads fast in a small town," Bill commented as he guided the buggy through the throng. Inside the courthouse, the trial was already underway despite the early hour. Harold Winters sat at the front, alongside Elmer Pickens and a man Clara assumed was his lawyer. Dawson sat alone at another table, no lawyer at his side. His face was bruised, suggesting his night in jail had not been gentle. Sheriff Carter stood near the door, looking uncomfortable as Judge Patterson, Clara, and Bill entered. The local justice of the peace, a thin, nervous-looking man, was presiding over the proceedings. "What is the meaning of this?" he spluttered as Judge Patterson strode down the aisle. "Justice Walter James," Judge Patterson said, his voice carrying through the now silent courtroom. "I am taking over this proceeding by authority of the circuit court." "This is highly irregular," the justice protested weakly. "What's irregular is the speed with which this trial was arranged and the lack of counsel for the defendant," Judge Patterson replied sharply. He turned to the crowd. "This court is now in session under my jurisdiction, and we will be addressing more than just the charges against Mr. Zimmerman." Harold Winters rose to his feet, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Your Honor, with all due respect, you have no jurisdiction here until next week's circuit." "I have jurisdiction wherever there is an attempt to pervert justice, Mr. Winters," the judge replied coldly. "And from what I've heard, that's precisely what's happening in this town." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Judge Patterson called Clara as his first witness, and she recounted her entire story to a stunned courtroom. When she produced Margaret Williams' locket, a woman in the back of the room let out a cry. "That was my sister's," she exclaimed, standing. "She wrote to me about the man she was to marry in St. Joe, but then the letters stopped coming. Mr. Winters told me she died of fever when I came looking for her." Judge Patterson invited the woman Mary Williams to examine the locket, which she identified positively as her sister's prized possession, given to her by their father before his death. Next, Martha testified about finding Clara after her escape and Dawson's efforts to help her. Paul Jenkins and others from town spoke about their suspicions regarding Winters' previous brides and the climate of fear he had created in St. Joe. Finally, Dawson himself took the stand, describing how he had become suspicious after 2 previous brides disappeared, and his decision to investigate when Clara went missing. Throughout it all, Winters sat stone-faced, occasionally whispering to his lawyer. But as the testimony mounted, even Elmer Pickens began to edge away from him, clearly sensing which way the wind was blowing. When all the witnesses had been heard, Judge Patterson addressed the crowded courtroom. "Based on the evidence presented today, I am dismissing all charges against Dawson Zimmerman." A cheer went up from many in attendance. "Furthermore, I am placing Harold Winters under arrest for the suspected murders of Margaret Williams and Elizabeth Turner, as well as the kidnapping and false imprisonment of Clara Jones." Sheriff Carter, who had grown increasingly uncomfortable as the proceedings continued, stepped forward without being called. "I'll take him into custody, Your Honor." "See that you do, Sheriff," the judge replied sternly. "And understand that your own conduct will be subject to review by the circuit court." As Winters was led away, his mask of civility finally cracked. "This isn't over," he shouted, looking directly at Clara. "None of you are safe from me." "Add threatening witnesses to the charges, Sheriff," Judge Patterson said calmly. Outside the courthouse, the town seemed transformed. People who had lived in fear of Winters for years were openly celebrating his downfall. Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers, many apologizing for not helping her sooner. "Miss Jones," Dawson's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing there, his face still bruised but his eyes bright. "I believe I owe you my freedom." "I believe we're even, Mr. Zimmerman," she replied with a smile. "You saved me from that cellar. I saved you from a false conviction." He laughed, then winced slightly from the pain in his ribs. "Fair enough. Though I have to say, when I first heard about a mail-order bride coming to town, I never expected she'd end up bringing down the most powerful man in the county. I never expected to be locked in a cellar, rescued by a cowboy, or testify in court either," Clara said. "It seems St. Joe is full of surprises." Martha joined them, beaming with satisfaction. "Judge Patterson says they'll hold Winters in the county jail until the formal trial next month. He's sending for federal marshals to ensure there's no funny business." "What will happen to Pickens?" Clara asked. "He's turned state's evidence," Martha replied, "telling everything he knows about Winters in exchange for leniency. Apparently there's quite a lot to tell, not just the brides, but land theft, loan sharking, and worse." In the days that followed, Clara stayed with Martha while the investigation into Winters' crimes continued. Workers excavating the area behind Winters' house made a grim discovery. 2 sets of remains buried in shallow graves near the root cellar Clara had escaped through. Though it would take time for formal identification, few doubted they were Margaret Williams and Elizabeth Turner. With Winters awaiting trial and much of his property seized as evidence, Clara found herself at a crossroads. She had come to Missouri to be a bride, but that path had led to a nightmare. Now she had to decide what to do next. One evening, a week after the courthouse drama, Dawson rode up to Martha's house. Clara was on the porch, reading one of Martha's books in the last light of day. "Evening, Miss Jones," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," she replied, setting aside her book. "And I thought we had agreed on Clara." He smiled, his bruises now faded to yellowish smudges. "Clara, then. I came to ask if you'd join me for dinner in town tomorrow. The hotel has a proper dining room, and I thought, well, we've never had a proper conversation that wasn't about Winters or danger or trials." Clara felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear for once. "I'd like that very much, Dawson." The next evening, Clara wore the best of the clothes Martha had loaned her, a blue dress that brought out the color in her eyes, or so Martha insisted. Dawson arrived promptly, looking transformed in clean clothes and freshly shaved, his usually wild hair tamed into submission. The hotel dining room was the fanciest establishment in St. Joe, with white tablecloths and actual glass windows, a luxury on the frontier. Heads turned as they entered, not with suspicion now, but with interest and some approval. Over dinner, they finally learned about each other beyond their shared ordeal. Clara told him about her life in Philadelphia, her father's love of books, and the circumstances that had led her to become a mail-order bride. Dawson spoke of growing up on his family's ranch, losing it to Winters, and his determination to rebuild something of his own. "My father always said land was the only thing worth having," he explained. "It's the only thing they aren't making any more of. I've managed to buy back about a quarter of what my family once owned, but it's enough to build on." "It's a beautiful piece of land," Clara said sincerely. "You should be proud of what you've accomplished." Dawson looked at her thoughtfully. "What will you do now, Clara? Will you go back east?" She shook her head. "I have nothing to go back to. No family, no home, no prospects. Besides," she added with a small smile, "I paid for a one-way ticket." "You could stay," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "St. Joe will be different now with Winters gone. There's opportunity here." "As what?" Clara asked. "Another mail-order bride for someone else?" "No," Dawson said quickly. "That's not what I meant. You're smart and brave, braver than most men I know. You could do whatever you set your mind to." The conversation shifted to lighter topics. But Clara found herself studying Dawson when he wasn't looking, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful way he chose his words, the strength in his hands that had broken down a cellar door to save a woman he didn't even know. In the weeks that followed, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. Clara helped Martha around the house and began teaching reading to several of the town's children whose education had been neglected. Dawson visited often, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, fresh honey from his hives, wildflowers he'd picked on his ride over. One evening, as they walked back from town after watching a traveling theater troupe's performance, Dawson stopped suddenly. "Clara," he said, his voice unusually serious, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes, my ranch. It's modest now, but it's growing. I'm adding cattle this year and the wheat crop looks promising." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say is it could support a family. A good family." Clara waited, hardly breathing. "I know you came here to be someone else's bride, and after what happened, I'd understand if you never wanted to think about marriage again. But if you could, if you might consider—" He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm making a mess of this." "No, you're not," Clara said softly. "Ask me properly, Dawson." He took her hands in his. "Clara Jones, I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing in that cellar, ready to fight your way out with nothing but a water pitcher. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need a husband or because I need a wife, but because I believe we could build something wonderful together." Clara felt tears welling in her eyes. "When I came to St. Joe, I thought I was settling for security at the cost of love. I never imagined I would find both in the same person." She squeezed his hands. "Yes, Dawson Zimmerman, I will marry you." Their wedding took place in the small church in St. Joe 2 months later, after Harold Winters had been convicted and sentenced to hang for his crimes. The entire town turned out, partly to celebrate the marriage but also to witness the final chapter in a story that had captivated them all. Martha, teary-eyed with happiness, stood as Clara's matron of honor. Bill Tucker served as Dawson's best man. Judge Patterson himself returned to St. Joe to perform the ceremony, declaring it the happiest duty he had ever performed in the town. As Clara and Dawson spoke their vows, she thought about the strange, terrible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Missouri as merchandise, a mail-order bride purchased sight unseen. She had endured darkness and fear in that cellar. But she had also found strength she didn't know she possessed, friends who stood by her when it mattered most, and a love that had grown naturally and honestly from shared courage and respect. When Judge Patterson pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up seemed to release the last of the shadow Winters had cast over the town. Clara felt it lifting from her own heart, as well as Dawson kissed her not as a possession finally claimed, but as a partner freely chosen. That evening he brought her to the ranch, their ranch now, where Martha and neighbors had decorated the house with wildflowers and ribbons. A new sign hung over the gate, "Zimmerman Ranch," with room left for additional words. "I thought we might add to it," Dawson explained, following her gaze. "Zimmerman Family Ranch, perhaps, when the time comes." Clara smiled, leaning against his shoulder as they looked at their home in the golden light of sunset. "I like the sound of that." 5 years later, Clara sat on the same porch, watching Dawson teaching their 3-year-old son Daniel to ride his first pony. Their infant daughter Sophie slept in a cradle beside her, her tiny hands curled into fists. The ranch had prospered beyond their hopes. The wheat fields had expanded, the cattle herd had grown, and they had added apple orchards that were just beginning to bear fruit. The house itself had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with a proper library filled with books. "Clara, used to teach not only their children but others from neighboring farms. St. Joe had changed too. With winters gone, the town had flourished under more honest leadership. New families had moved in, bringing skills and energy. Clara's impromptu teaching had evolved into a proper school, which she still helped with 3 days a week. Martha still lived with them, now officially Grandma Martha to the children, though she had no blood relation. She had become family in every way that mattered. As Clara watched her husband lift their laughing son onto his shoulders, she thought about the day she had stepped off that stagecoach, alone and afraid. She thought about the darkness of the cellar, and the moment when the door had crashed open to reveal Dawson standing there. Life had taken her on a journey she could never have anticipated, from a mail-order bride locked in a cellar to a beloved wife, mother, and respected member of the community. But then, she reflected, that was the nature of the frontier. It tested you, changed you, and if you were strong enough, it rewarded you with a life richer than you could have imagined. "Mama, look," Daniel called, waving wildly from atop Dawson's shoulders. "I'm tall as the sky." "I see you, my love," she called back, smiling as Dawson caught her eye over their son's head, his expression full of the same love and wonder she felt every day. They had built something wonderful together, just as he had promised that night he proposed. Not just a ranch or a family, but a life where they both were free to grow, to love, and to build a future as vast and promising as the western sky above them.